I didn't realize a lawn could turn into a battlefield until I woke up at 2:13 a.m. to the harsh click of my motion lights, followed by the unmistakable hiss of water, like my own house was trying to spit someone out. I bolted upright, heart hammering, hair stuck to my forehead. My husband, Ethan, mumbled my name, half asleep, worried without knowing why. "What is it?" he asked. I didn't answer. I just padded to the front window, the cold floor biting my feet, and pulled the curtain back 1 careful inch. Under the white cone of the porch light, my front lawn glittered wet and furious. The sprinklers were firing in sharp bursts, sweeping left to right like searchlights. And there, near the flower bed I'd re-edged 3 weekends in a row, someone crouched low, moving like they knew exactly where my sensors were. A woman, blonde hair yanked into a tight ponytail, a hoodie pulled up, in her hand, gardening shears. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like my body forgot how to breathe. Because I knew that silhouette. Karen, the self-appointed mayor of our cul-de-sac. The woman who'd spent the last week telling everyone I was unstable because I didn't want neighborhood kids digging holes in my lawn like it was a public park. I watched her glance over her shoulder, quick and twitchy, then lean toward the sprinkler control box like she was about to cut the wires. For a second, I wasn't 42. I was a kid again. Small, cornered, watching someone ruin something I'd built with my own hands. Ethan came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Babe, what are you doing?" I swallowed, my throat burned. "She's on our property," I whispered. "She's trying to sabotage it." He leaned forward, finally seeing what I saw. I felt his body tense against mine. And that's when Karen looked up, straight at my window, like she could feel my eyes on her. Even through the glass, the message was clear. "This isn't over. My name is Penelope Penny Carter, and I'm 42 years old, an age where people assume you've learned how to let things go. I have not. Not because I'm petty, not because I hate children, but because I spent my entire childhood in chaos, and I promised myself that when I finally got my own home, it would be a place where I could breathe without bracing for impact." I grew up in a cramped house with 5 siblings, the oldest of us always getting the worst deal. The responsibility without the authority. If something got broken, it was my fault for not watching them. If someone got hurt, it was my fault for not being careful. If dinner was late, it was my fault for not helping enough. Order wasn't a personality quirk for me. It was survival. After college, I clawed my way into a career as a software developer. The kind of job that looks clean on paper but demands your entire brain. I work from home, video calls, deadlines, meetings where one glitch can make you look incompetent. My income is good, but what I value more than money is quiet, silence, predictability, space where my nervous system doesn't have to stay on guard. 5 years ago, after my divorce, I bought this house on a corner lot that faces a cul-de-sac. I remember the first time I stood in the front yard with the realtor. Bright green grass, wide sky, the kind of suburban calm people pay extra for. It felt like a reset button. The lawn became my sanctuary, not in a dramatic way, just a small, controlled piece of earth that answered to me. I planned it carefully. Reseeded patches, trimmed edges, pulled weeds by hand like I was pulling out the last threads of my old life. At first, the neighborhood kids didn't bother me. A stray ball here and there, a frisbee landing too close to my shrubs. I'd toss it back with a polite smile and think, at least they're outside. At least they're laughing. Sometimes it even made me nostalgic. I remembered street hockey with my brothers, scraped knees, summer air. But over the last year, something shifted. It wasn't a ball anymore. It was constant traffic, kids aged 8 to 12 treating my lawn like an extension of the cul-de-sac. Tag. Soccer. Racing across my grass in muddy shoes. And the worst part wasn't just the damage. It was the noise right outside my home office window, sharp shrieks that cut through conference calls, pounding feet, the sound of my peace being treated like a joke. I tried being reasonable. The first time I stepped outside and asked them to stop, I kept my voice gentle. "Hey guys, can you play in the park down the street? Just please stay off the grass." They nodded, smiled, ran off. The next day they were back. I went to their parents, knocked on doors, introduced myself properly, like an adult who believes adults will behave like adults. A few apologized, most shrugged. Kids will be kids. It's just grass. One man, Mike, 39, actually laughed and said, "You should be grateful for the free entertainment." I stood there, blinking, feeling that old childhood heat rise in my chest, the feeling of being dismissed like my boundaries were a punchline. Around that same time, I met Ethan at a local farmer's market. He was buying peaches. I was buying jam from a woman with flour on her apron. Ethan had this warm steadiness, like he'd lived through his own storms and decided to be kind anyway. We got married 2 years ago, and he became the calm voice in my head when my old instincts got too sharp. But even Ethan didn't fully understand what the lawn meant to me until the day everything blew up. It was a crucial video call with a potential client, one contract that could have doubled my income for the year. I was mid-presentation, trying to sound confident, when the screaming started. Outside my window, a pack of kids playing tag, shrieking like my living room was their playground. The client's face tightened, my words stumbled. After the call ended, no contract, no polite follow-up, I walked outside and saw the final insult. They'd brought shovels. They'd dug holes in my lawn to build a makeshift mini golf course, like my yard was a sandbox. My grass looked like it had been hit by mortar fire. I stood there, staring at the torn earth, and something in me went cold and determined. That night, I researched solutions. Fences, cameras, signs. And then I found it. Motion-activated sprinklers. A way to protect my property without yelling at children. Non-confrontational, harmless. At least, that's what I told myself. The first day the sprinklers went live, I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until the sensors clicked. I was in my home office, halfway through debugging a stubborn piece of code when the familiar sound of pounding feet crossed my lawn. Fast, careless, like nothing in the world belonged to anyone but them. Then, hiss! A sudden arc of water burst from the ground, sharp and precise. The kids screamed, not in pain but in surprise, high-pitched and shocked. They scattered like startled birds, shoes slapping pavement, laughter mixing with confusion. I didn't smile, I didn't laugh. I just sat there, shoulders slowly lowering, something tight inside me finally loosening. For the first time in months, my lawn was quiet. By sunset, word had spread. Kids approached the edge of the grass like it was lava, testing the boundary with cautious toes before pulling back. My sprinklers became a warning system, a clear message without confrontation. I thought I'd solved the problem. I was wrong. The first knock came the next afternoon. I opened the door to find Karen standing there, arms crossed, lips pulled into a thin, furious line. She was 38, always perfectly put together, the kind of woman who chaired bake sales and knew everyone's business. "Do you realize what you've done?" she snapped, not bothering with a greeting. I blinked. "Protected my property?" She scoffed. "You soaked children. Children, Penny. One of them came home crying." "I'm not aiming them at kids," I said evenly. "They activate when someone steps on my lawn." "So you admit it's intentional?" "Yes, because I asked, repeatedly, and no one listened." Her eyes narrowed. "You could have just put up a fence." "And you could have taught kids to respect boundaries," I replied. Her mouth opened, then closed. The silence stretched. She leaned in slightly, voice dropping. "You're making enemies." That was the first seed of dread. Over the next few days, I felt it. The shift in the air when I stepped outside, conversations stopping mid-sentence, curtains moving, smiles disappearing. Someone shoved a note into my mailbox. "Lighten up, it's just grass." Another, a day later, written in jagged marker. "You hate kids." I started double-checking locks at night. Ethan noticed first. "People are staring," he said one evening as we took out the trash. "Like, hard." "I don't care," I told him, but my voice was too quick. Parents began showing up, not to talk, but to accuse. One woman shouted from the sidewalk that I was ruining the community. Mike, the same man who laughed at me before, smirked and said, "You must be fun at parties." I felt that old, familiar feeling crawl up my spine, the sense of being labeled, boxed in, misunderstood, and then came the whispering. I overheard two moms at the end of the cul-de-sac talking as I walked past with groceries. "She's unstable, probably why she's divorced." I stopped short, grocery bag digging into my palm. At night, I lay awake, replaying it all. The kids laughing, the parents dismissing me, Karen's warning. "You're making enemies." My lawn was safe, but my peace wasn't. I tried to remind myself I'd done nothing wrong. The sprinklers didn't hurt anyone, water dried, grass didn't. But the atmosphere grew heavier by the day. Ethan suggested compromise. Maybe adjust the hours? Or talk to the HOA before this escalates? I waved it off. Why should I have to negotiate for my own property? But even as I said it, doubt crept in. Because this wasn't just about grass anymore. It was about control. And the people around me didn't like that I'd finally taken some. The final straw came a week later when I checked my mailbox and found an official envelope, thick, white, stamped with authority. A complaint filed with the HOA. Multiple complaints. A scheduled hearing. My hands shook as I read it. This had crossed from neighborhood annoyance into something else entirely. And deep down I knew. This was only the beginning. The night I caught Karen in my yard, I didn't scream. I didn't rush outside waving my phone like some kind of suburban vigilante. I stood frozen behind the curtain, the thin fabric brushing my knuckles, my breath shallow enough that I could hear it in my ears. The sprinklers pulsed again, short, aggressive bursts of water slicing across the lawn, and Karen flinched, stepping back just enough to avoid the spray. She moved with purpose now, not surprised, not startled. Prepared. I felt something twist in my chest. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a neighbor venting frustration. This was sabotage. Penny, Ethan whispered behind me. His hand rested on my shoulder, warm and steady, but my body was already in fight or flight. She's cutting the system, I said, my voice barely there. I watched Karen crouch lower, gardening shears glinting under the porch light. She reached toward the control box, fingers closing around the casing. That was it. I stepped outside. The porch door slammed louder than I meant it to. Karen jerked upright, eyes wide for half a second before hardening into something defensive and sharp. What the hell are you doing? I demanded. She straightened slowly, like she was the one in control here, fixing a problem. That's private property. So is a neighborhood, she snapped, and you're destroying it. I laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. By watering my lawn? You're humiliating children. I'm enforcing boundaries. She took a step toward me. The sprinklers surged, soaking the hem of her jeans. She hissed and jumped back. Turn it off, she yelled. No, I said. My hands were shaking now, but I didn't step back. Leave. Her eyes burned with something ugly. You think this ends here? Ethan appeared beside me then, tall and solid, his presence shifting the balance. Karen, he said calmly, you need to go, now. For a moment, I thought she might lunge. Instead, she laughed, a brittle, hollow sound, and turned on her heel, stomping back to the sidewalk. She didn't leave right away. She sat in her car for 20 full minutes. Engine running, headlights off, just watching our house. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I installed security cameras. It felt ridiculous at first, like admitting defeat, but something in my gut told me I needed proof. Not opinions, not stories, evidence. And what I captured over the next week made my skin crawl. Kids still tried to dart across the lawn, less often, more cautiously, but what shocked me were the adults. Neighbors stepping onto my grass at night, deliberately triggering the sprinklers, then laughing as they ran off. One man brought his phone out, filming. But the worst footage came 3 days later. Karen again, sneaking into my yard under cover of darkness, gardening shears in hand. Clear as day. My stomach turned as I watched the playback. The way she looked around. The practiced movements. The intent. I called the police. The officer, a young guy named Dave, watched the footage with his jaw tight. You did the right thing calling, he said. We'll issue a warning, maybe more, if she escalates. A warning felt small, but it was something. The confrontation came the next day. Karen didn't deny it. She exploded. You forced me to do it, she screamed on the sidewalk, voice carrying. You're destroying this community. You're robbing kids of their childhood. My heart raced, memories crashing in, my father's temper, the way shouting made my body shrink. I stepped back instinctively. Neighbors gathered, phones out, whispers rising. And then, unexpectedly, a voice cut through the noise. Enough. Mr. Thompson, 72, my elderly neighbor, stood at the edge of his driveway, cane in hand. His voice trembled, but his eyes were steady. I fought in Vietnam, he said. I never thought I'd say this, but the noise out here is worse than bombs. Some of us need rest. A hush fell. Another neighbor, Lisa, 35, stepped forward. My son was playing on your lawn, she said, looking at me. I should have listened. I'm sorry. Not everyone agreed. Mike rolled his eyes. Someone muttered about overreacting. But the line had been drawn. That night, as Ethan and I lay in bed, the tension thick between us, he spoke quietly. Is it worth it? I stared at the ceiling, my heart still pounding. I didn't know the answer. The HOA hearing was 3 weeks away, and I had a feeling everything, my reputation, my peace, my place in this neighborhood, was about to be judged. Shock doesn't always come as screaming or tears. Sometimes it's quieter than that, like the way my hands shook when I tried to hold a coffee mug the morning after Karen showed up with those shears, like the way I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. I'd spent my life believing that if I followed the rules, worked hard, stayed polite, didn't ask for more than my share, people would meet me halfway. Instead, I was being painted as a villain for protecting what was mine. The days after that confrontation blurred together in a haze of tension. Every sound outside made my shoulders tighten, a car slowing down, footsteps on the sidewalk, laughter that lingered just a second too long. Ethan tried to ground me. "Let's take it one step at a time," he said one evening as we sat at the kitchen table, untouched plates between us. "We've got the footage. You didn't do anything illegal." "I know," I replied, but knowing and feeling were two different things. At night, doubt crept in. Did I escalate this? Should I have just put up a fence? Am I becoming the person I used to fear? The rigid, unyielding adult who couldn't bend? I thought about Mr. Grayson, the neighbor from my childhood who used to yell at us for stepping on his lawn. I'd sworn I'd never be like him, and yet here I was. But then I'd remember the holes, the shovels, the way my client's face tightened as my presentation dissolved into background noise, the months of being ignored, and the doubt would harden into something else. Resolve. Still, the emotional weight settled deep in my chest. I replayed conversations, wondering where I could have chosen a softer word, a different tone. I replayed Karen's voice, "You're making enemies," and felt a cold truth in it. She wasn't warning me. She was promising. The first real crack came when Ethan admitted he was scared. "I keep thinking about retaliation," he said quietly one night, lying beside me in the dark. "What if they mess with the car or the house?" My throat tightened. I hadn't wanted to say it out loud, but I'd been thinking the same thing. "I don't want to live like this," he added, constantly bracing. Neither did I. That's when I realized something uncomfortable. This situation wasn't just about my lawn anymore. It was affecting my marriage, my sleep, my sense of safety. And still, I couldn't bring myself to back down, because backing down felt like erasing myself. A few days later, the HOA letter arrived confirming the hearing date. Seeing my name printed under the word complaint sent a jolt through me, sharp and humiliating. It reminded me of my divorce paperwork, how clinical, how detached, how final. I sat at my desk and opened a new folder on my computer. HOA hearing evidence. I organized everything meticulously. Dates, times, videos, photos of the lawn before and after. Emails I'd sent politely asking parents to intervene. If they were going to judge me, they'd see the full story. Still, there were moments, quiet, private ones, where guilt seeped in sideways. One afternoon, while taking out the trash, I heard a group of kids whispering across the street. "That's her. Mr. Sprinkler." They giggled and ran off. The nickname shouldn't have hurt, but it did. It stung because it flattened me into a caricature, because it stripped away the context, the months of patience, the exhaustion, because it reduced me to a punchline instead of a person. I went back inside and leaned against the door, eyes closed, breathing through the ache. Is this the hill I want to die on, I wondered? And then another question followed, quieter but sharper. If I don't stand here, where do I stand? The first face-to-face confrontation after that night came with Lisa, the mom who'd apologized earlier. She knocked on my door one afternoon, wringing her hands. "I just wanted to say, I really am sorry," she said. "I didn't think it was a big deal until I saw the damage." Something loosened in my chest. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." It wasn't forgiveness I needed. It was acknowledgement. Still, for every Lisa, there was a Karen. For every apology, another dirty look. By the time the HOA hearing loomed closer, I felt stretched thin, caught between standing my ground and wanting my life back. I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired. Tired of being misunderstood. Tired of feeling like the villain in my own story. Tired of wondering if protecting my peace meant sacrificing my place in this community. As I shut down my laptop one night, evidence compiled, arguments rehearsed, Ethan reached for my hand. "Whatever happens," he said, "I'm with you." I squeezed back, my pulse finally slowing. I didn't know how this would end, but I knew I wouldn't face it alone. The closer the HOA hearing crept, the more the neighborhood seemed to split cleanly down the middle, like a fault line had opened beneath the cul-de-sac, and everyone was forced to choose which side they were standing on. There was no in-between anymore. People who used to wave now looked straight through me. Others went out of their way to stop and whisper encouragement, their voices low, like they were afraid of being overheard. I'm glad someone finally said something. We've all been thinking it. Don't let them bully you. Each comment helped, and hurt at the same time. Because if so many people felt this way, why had I been made the villain? Ethan started parking our cars differently at night, pulling them closer to the house. I caught him double-checking the garage door before bed, his jaw tight. "You don't have to do that," I told him once. "I know," he said, "but I will." That was the thing about escalation. It didn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looked like quiet fear creeping into daily routines. The notes in the mailbox escalated too. At first, they were passive-aggressive. "Relax. It's a neighborhood, not a museum." Then they got cruel. "No wonder your first marriage failed. Control freaks always end up alone." I stared at that one for a long time, fingers numb. The words slid under my skin. Found old scars I'd spent years pretending didn't ache anymore. Ethan wanted to report them. "There's no proof," I said, folding the paper carefully and placing it in the evidence folder anyway. But I want it on record. The cameras kept catching things. A group of teens daring each other to sprint across my lawn at night, laughing when the sprinklers went off. An adult, hood up, face hidden, kicking one of my solar lights out of the ground. And then there was Karen, always just outside the frame, always present, always watching. She never confronted me directly again. She didn't need to. She'd weaponized the social structure of the neighborhood instead, group chats I wasn't part of, conversations I'd never hear but could feel the consequences of. I overheard her once while walking past her driveway. "She's dangerous," she said to another mom. "Unstable. You never know what she'll do next." Dangerous for installing sprinklers. That word followed me for days. I started second-guessing myself constantly. Every time a child walked by, I wondered if I looked threatening. Every time I stepped onto my own lawn, I felt like I was being watched, judged. The tension bled into my work. I lost focus during meetings, missed a deadline for the first time in years. My manager gently asked if everything was okay. I lied and said yes. The breaking point, for Ethan, came one night when he found a deep scratch along the side of his car. It wasn't accidental. The line was too clean, too deliberate. He stood there in the driveway, jaw clenched, running his fingers just above the paint like he didn't quite trust himself to touch it. "They're escalating," he said quietly. My stomach dropped. "You don't know that." "I do," he replied, "and you do too." That night he barely slept, neither did I. The fear wasn't just abstract anymore, it was physical, tangible. Something that could cost us money, safety, peace. For the first time, I considered turning the sprinklers off. Not because I thought I was wrong, but because I was exhausted. 2 days before the hearing, Mr. Thompson knocked on our door. He moved slower than usual, cane tapping softly against the porch. When I invited him inside, he declined, choosing instead to sit on the front step like he didn't want to impose. "I heard what they've been saying," he said after a moment. "About you." I swallowed. "And?" He shook his head. "It's nonsense. People don't like being told no, especially when they've gotten used to taking." His words settled something in me. He went on, voice rough but steady. "I should have said something sooner. We all should have. But it's easier to let one person be uncomfortable than risk being unpopular." I felt tears sting my eyes, unexpected and sharp. "I'm scared," I admitted. The words tasted like defeat. "I don't know if this is worth it anymore." Mr. Thompson looked at me for a long time. "Standing up rarely feels worth it while you're doing it," he said. "Only after." The night before the hearing, Ethan and I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by printed screenshots, flash drives, and labeled folders. It felt surreal, preparing a legal-style defense over grass. "You don't have to do this," he said gently. "We can pull the system, sell the house, start over somewhere quieter." The idea tempted me more than I wanted to admit. But then I thought about Karen in my yard with those shears, about the way she'd looked at me, like my boundaries were an insult. And something in me hardened. "If I back down now," I said slowly, "I'm telling everyone that intimidation works." Ethan nodded, though worry still lined his face. The morning of the HOA hearing, I dressed carefully, not defensively, not aggressively, just myself. Calm, professional, grounded. As we walked into the community center, I felt every eye turn toward me. Karen sat on the opposite side of the room, surrounded by her supporters, lips pursed, arms crossed. She didn't look at me. I set up my laptop, my hands steady despite the pounding in my chest. This wasn't just about a lawn anymore. It was about whether I was allowed to exist here without apologizing for it. And as the HOA president called the meeting to order, I realized, one way or another, something was about to break. If the escalation was loud, my lowest point was silent. It came after the HOA hearing, After the arguments, after the evidence, after the gasps in the room when Karen's late-night sabotage played on the screen. After the board asked for a recess and everyone spilled into the hallway, buzzing with opinions and whispered judgments. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt hollow. Ethan went to get us coffee from the vending machine. I stayed behind, sitting alone on a plastic chair beneath fluorescent lights that made everyone look tired and gray. My reflection in the darkened window looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders slightly hunched, hands folded like I was waiting for a verdict on my character, not my lawn. That's when the weight hit me. Not anger, not fear. Exhaustion. The kind that seeps into your bones and whispers, "You don't have anything left." I closed my eyes and let memories wash over me, not just from the last few months, but from years ago. My childhood kitchen, always too loud. My siblings shouting. My parents arguing. Me retreating into silence, into neatness, into control because it was the only way to feel safe. I realized something then that made my chest ache. This wasn't just about the lawn. It never was. The lawn was the last line of defense in a life where I'd spent decades surrendering space to noise, to expectations, to people who didn't listen when I said stop. And now, even here, even as an adult woman who owned her home outright, who paid her taxes, who followed the rules, I was still being asked to make myself smaller so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. The board called us back in. They hadn't decided yet. They needed time. Karen smirked as she passed me on the way to her seat, leaning in just enough to whisper, "You could have avoided all this." I didn't respond, because suddenly I wasn't sure anymore. That night, back home, the silence felt heavier than it ever had. The sprinklers were off, temporarily disabled at the HOA's request until a decision was made. The lawn sat open and vulnerable, like a boundary erased. Kids ran across it the next afternoon. No hesitation, no fear, just entitlement. I watched from the window, my throat tightening, unable to bring myself to step outside. I felt like I'd failed, not just at protecting grass, but at protecting myself. Ethan found me standing there, unmoving. "Penny," he said softly, "come sit down." "I don't want to fight anymore," I whispered. The words surprised me as they left my mouth. "I'm tired of being the bad guy. I'm tired of proving I'm not crazy for wanting peace." He wrapped his arms around me, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself sag into his chest. That night I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just quiet tears soaking into his shirt as the truth settled in. Even if I won, something had already been lost. My sense of belonging, my certainty, the simple joy of stepping onto my own lawn without bracing myself. I lay awake long after Ethan fell asleep, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Mr. Grayson, the old neighbor I'd once resented, had felt the same loneliness. If standing firm always came with this kind of cost. A dark, dangerous thought crept in then. Maybe Karen was right. Maybe I should have just let it go. Maybe peace was never meant for people like me. The next morning, I drafted an email to the HOA. Short, polite. I offered to remove the motion sensors entirely, to compromise, to end the conflict. My finger hovered over the send button, and for a moment, a long, terrifying moment, I almost pressed it. Because giving up felt easier than continuing to fight, because I didn't know how much more of this I could survive. That was my lowest point. Every time I opened my laptop, it stared back at me. Calm, reasonable, self-erasing. The kind of message women are praised for writing. I'm willing to compromise. I don't want conflict. I'll adjust. Each sentence felt like folding myself smaller. The turning point didn't come with a dramatic speech or a sudden surge of courage. It came with a knock on my door. I opened it to find Mr. Thompson standing there again, this time holding a manila folder against his chest like it was something precious. "I didn't want to interfere," he said, eyes serious, "but I thought you should see this before you decide anything." Inside the folder were printed statements, emails, screenshots, complaints, not about me, about the noise, the damage, the kids running wild at all hours. They were dated months, some even years, before I installed the sprinklers. "I've been on the HOA mailing list a long time," he continued. "People have been frustrated. They just didn't want to be the first one to say it out loud." My throat tightened. "So they let me be," I said quietly. He nodded. It's easier to let one woman take the heat than to admit a community problem. After he left, I sat on the couch staring at those papers, my heart pounding, not with fear this time, but clarity. I hadn't created this conflict. I'd exposed it. That afternoon, my phone rang. The HOA president, Margaret, asked if I could stop by for a quick conversation before the final decision. I almost said no. Instead, I went. Her office was small and neutral, filled with binders and the faint smell of coffee. She gestured for me to sit. "I want you to know," she said, folding her hands, "this isn't as one-sided as it's been made to look." She slid a document across the desk. "A proposed resolution." I read it once, then again. The sprinklers could stay, with conditions: adjusted hours, reduced pressure, clear signage. And, this was the part that made my breath catch, a community initiative to develop a designated play area at the unused lot at the end of the street. A park. A real one. "We can't keep pretending this is just about your lawn," Margaret said. "It's about lack of structure, and frankly, a lack of accountability." I walked out of that office lighter than I'd felt in months. The final HOA meeting felt different from the start. The energy had shifted. When Mr. Thompson spoke again, about sleep, about respect, his voice carried weight. When another parent admitted she'd ignored the problem out of guilt about being too strict, something cracked open. And then something unexpected happened. Rachel, one of Karen's loudest supporters, stood up and started crying. "I was wrong," she said, wiping her face. "I didn't want to be like my parents, so I let my son do whatever he wanted. I didn't think about how it affected other people." Her honesty rippled through the room. Karen stayed silent. When the decision was announced, my hands trembled, not with fear, but relief. The sprinklers stayed. The park plan passed. And suddenly, people were looking at me differently, not like a villain, but like a catalyst. After the meeting, parents approached me to apologize. Even Mike shuffled over, awkward and stiff. "I should have listened," he said. "I was wrong." I nodded, not graciously, not angrily, just honestly. That night, Ethan and I sat on the porch, watching the lawn under soft light. "You didn't back down," he said, "even when you wanted to." "I almost did," I admitted. "I was so close." "But you didn't," he replied, "and look what happened." For the first time, I understood something I'd missed before. Standing up doesn't always make you powerful in the moment. Sometimes it just makes space for truth, for change, for other people to finally speak. I deleted the draft email. The boundary stayed. And for the first time since this began, I slept without bracing myself. The fallout didn't come as an explosion. It came as a slow, steady collapse of the story Karen had been telling about me. Within a week of the HOA decision, the neighborhood felt quieter, not just in sound, but in tension. The sharp edges dulled. Conversations resumed at normal volume. People who'd avoided eye contact now offered tentative nods, cautious smiles. The truth had done what it always does when given enough air. It rearranged loyalties. Karen stopped walking the cul-de-sac in the mornings. Her group chats, once buzzing, fell strangely silent. I didn't know exactly what was said behind closed doors, but I could feel the shift in the way people spoke around her name. Not angry anymore, embarrassed. The community park project moved forward quickly. A committee was formed, and to my surprise, my name was on the list. "You don't have to," Margaret told me when I called her, uncertain, "but you have perspective we need." Perspective. That word sat heavy and warm in my chest. I agreed, on one condition. I wasn't going to be the bad cop anymore. I wasn't going to be the lone boundary holder everyone hid behind. And to my relief, I wasn't. Mike turned out to be surprisingly knowledgeable about landscaping. We spent one afternoon arguing, civilly, about grass varieties for high-traffic areas, and I caught myself laughing. Lisa brought her son to help plant shrubs near the proposed playground. She made him apologize to me, properly, without prompting, and the sincerity in his voice loosened something in my chest I hadn't realized was still tight. Even the kids changed. One afternoon, I watched a group of them stop at the edge of my lawn, debating whether to cut across. "No," one of them said firmly. "That's Mrs. Carter's yard." They went around. I didn't step outside. I didn't wave. I just stood at the window and let the moment settle. Karen, meanwhile, unraveled quietly. I heard she'd tried to protest the park plans and was shut down, firmly, publicly. I heard she'd complained that the HOA had sided with a troublemaker and received polite but unmoved responses. 2 weeks later, I saw a moving truck in her driveway. We made eye contact once, briefly. She gave me a tight nod, not an apology, not forgiveness. A closing. I watched as boxes disappeared into the truck and felt nothing dramatic. No triumph. No satisfaction. Just relief. The lawn healed quickly with help from neighbors who showed up one Saturday morning with sod, tools, and coffee. Mr. Thompson supervised from a lawn chair, cane propped against his knee, offering gentle corrections like a retired general. Ethan grilled burgers. Kids played in the cul-de-sac, not on my grass. Laughter floated, lighter now. This time it didn't feel like an invasion. It felt earned. The sprinklers stayed installed, but I rarely needed them. Respect had replaced deterrence. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the lawn glowed green again, Ethan joined me on the porch. "You did this without yelling," he said, "without hurting anyone." I shook my head. I didn't do it alone. "That's the point," he replied. Karen's house sold a month later. No one made a big deal of it. No gossip, no celebration. Just a quiet understanding that something unhealthy had left. And in its place, something better had begun. The irony wasn't lost on me. By refusing to surrender my space, I'd helped create more space for kids to play, for neighbors to speak, for a community to grow up a little. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished, like a chapter had closed cleanly, without needing revenge or validation. I stood my ground, and the world adjusted. The funny thing about peace is that you don't notice it right away. It slips back into your life quietly, like the way I started opening my office window again without flinching, or how the sound of kids playing no longer sent my pulse racing. It took weeks before I realized I wasn't bracing myself anymore. The lawn is green now, healthier than it's been in years. Sometimes I sit on the porch in the evenings, a glass of iced tea sweating in my hand, and listen to the neighborhood breathe. The new park at the end of the street is nearly finished. I can hear the thud of a soccer ball, the rhythmic squeak of swings. The kids have a place that belongs to them, and I still have a place that belongs to me. Ethan joins me most nights, settling into the chair beside mine like it's always been that way. The tension we carried for months has drained out of our conversations. We laugh more easily. Sleep comes faster. A few days ago, a boy from down the street, Tommy, 10 years old, curious and sharp-eyed, asked if I could teach him how to mow a lawn properly. I showed him how to walk the edges first. "Why not the middle?" he asked. "Because boundaries matter," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. He nodded like that made perfect sense. I still hear the nickname sometimes, Sprinkler Penny, but it doesn't sting anymore. Names lose their power when you stop apologizing for existing. I used to think standing up for yourself meant becoming hard, cold, unlikable. I was wrong. Sometimes it means being willing to be misunderstood long enough for the truth to catch up. This experience didn't turn me into the neighborhood villain or the hero. It turned me into something quieter and stronger. A woman who knows that peace isn't something you wait for permission to have. It's something you protect. And if protecting it makes people uncomfortable, that doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means the boundary is working.